and welcome to The Art of Being Human. I'm going to start off today and show you a couple of books, actually 3 books that I brought in. There's a lot written about diabetes, and this is, of course, what we're working with. And maybe one of the most complete books is this, written by the American Diabetes Association. It is a complete guide to diabetes. Now, this is an older copy. I've had it for a few years. I think, though, that they're probably making more modern copies as time goes on. I never bought another one. What I like about this book, it goes into every aspect of diabetes. I mean, it's really, really complete. Complications, the treatment of it, the diagnosis of it, it's very complete. But what I especially like about it is that it's written in down-to-earth language. It's not like a technical book that you have to know an awful lot before you can read it and get anything out of it. It's non-technical, written in just an ordinary home style. You can pick it up and flip through it, and it's got a good index. You can look up what you want to. If you're having a kidney problem because you're diabetic, then there are sections on that, and it really is a good book. So I got it when I first became diagnosed because I needed to know more about it. If I was going to be living with something like this, I wanted to know as much as I could about it, and this was one of the books that I picked up. But there's a lot of books out there. There's a lot of information written about diabetes, and here's one. I mean, you can get a ton of them, and some of them aren't bad. This one here, it's a one that's demonstrated by artwork. Whatever they discuss, they demonstrate it with artwork. I kind of like it because it's succinct, it tells you what you need to know, and it does it in such a way that it's more enjoyable to read. But it is written for, for people who have some education. I mean, I read it, and I enjoy it, and I learn from it. So it's not like written for a 4-year-old. And you can get guides. If you go to fast food restaurants, you can pick up these guides to what the nutrition is. If you go to Wendy's or McDonald's or some of those places, then you may want to know what you're eating, and it'll give you, if you look at it, what you're eating, and it'll give you the exchanges and how much carb and how much salt and how much protein and all of that. And it's handy to have that if you like to eat out, to find out what it is. Now, I was listening to a show, and Dr. Besser, I don't know if you know who he is. He's the doctor for Good Morning America for ABC, I guess it is. And he said that, if you go to a restaurant to eat, you're going to get all kinds of salt, fat, whatever it is, and you're going to probably get servings that are way too big, because portion control is important if you're a diabetic, to keep your blood sugar in check. He said if you go to a place, and he mentioned Wendy's, I guess, but you can pick and choose what you want to eat. And if you get a book and it tells you exactly how much salt and fat and protein and carbohydrate and all of that that's in it, you can actually take choices and make a meal for yourself that's pretty healthy. If you order at a restaurant, then you're going to get whatever they serve for that meal, including all the salt and the fat and all of that. So he suggested that you go to a fast food restaurant if you want to, and just make wise choices in terms of what you eat. We are going to do a little bit in nutrition, but I'm not going to do a lot in nutrition when I get to that point, because I don't want to tell you what to eat and what not to eat. That's between you and your doctor. And the reason I feel so strongly about this, and I will be making some comments about nutrition and protein and so forth, which is important to have, but the reason I don't want to get into it too deeply is that some diabetics, for example, have severe problems with their kidneys. Their kidneys start to fail. And when that happens, it's not unusual for a doctor to say that they can't have protein, because they're leaking protein from the kidneys into the blood. If the kidney loses its ability to filter out the toxins, which is what the kidneys do, then you may end up by leaking into your system protein. And if that's the case, you may not be able to eat protein. If you're having a problem with blood pressure, which a lot of people do, whether they're diabetics or not, you may not be able to have salt. You'll have to go to a place if you want to eat out where you can get a meal that's not high in salt. And I know people that can't have salt at all. So in terms of nutrition, we will be getting into it, but I'm not telling people what to eat and what not to eat. I'm only going to be showing some general things about it in reference to diabetes that might be helpful. I'm not your doctor, and I'm not telling you what to do, so I'm not treating you. I don't want to say anything that would make you follow something I said if it wasn't appropriate for you, because each person is different. Well, let's get back to these charts that I have here. If there is no insulin, or if there's not enough insulin to get sugar into the cells are starved for sugar. Remember, the glucose is their nourishment. And the cells get starved, and there's very little energy, and the sugar stays in the blood, and it gets too high, and it covers the organs and nerves and damages organs and nerves. If you can imagine, just imagine, you have too high blood sugar. If your blood sugar is too high and there's no insulin to regulate it, then the sugar stays in the blood, and the blood gets sticky. And what causes a neuropathy? What causes circulation problems in a diabetic anyway? The blood gets sticky and it doesn't move well. It makes it harder for the heart to pump it. So that can start a problem with the heart. It can get stuck and sticky in the little tiny blood vessels, and therefore you have blood vessel problems, and that's where you can get a lot of neuropathy. And you can get nerve damage because the sticky substances are attaching itself to every organ. If your blood sugar is too high, there's not an organ in your body that's not affected by that. Your eyes can be affected, the blood vessels are too sticky, there's blood in there and it's not circulating well, so you've got circulation problems. You can lose your feet, your feet will get black if you get an infection and there's no circulation. You can't heal well, and so you can get from bad to worse and end up by losing a foot or losing a limb. My great-grandmother lost a whole leg due to diabetes. So at any rate, it's a very, very bad problem. Excessive blood sugar is a very, very bad problem. So let's go on with this. It attaches itself, the excess sugar and the problems that you have with sugar in the blood attaches itself to all of your organs, and your nerves are affected too. So here's kind of a cycle I put together. You eat food for energy and nourishment, and it produces sugar in the blood, which is the glucose. And then the insulin normally gets the sugar into the cells to metabolize in the cells for energy and for nourishment. But in diabetes, the sugar does not get into the cells properly because of the lack of insulin. So it just stays in the blood. It doesn't get into the cells. So what happens with the cells? They're starving. They want food. They need energy. They're not getting it because they're not able to get it because there's no insulin to put the blood glucose into the cells. That's what the insulin does. So it gets stuck. The sugar stays in the blood, and it gets higher and higher and higher. And then it's going to attach to organs and nerves, and it's going to cause immense damage all over your body. That's why the complications are so bad. Now, if you cannot take insulin orally. You can't swallow it. I can't take an insulin pill. The reason is that insulin is also a protein, and if you take insulin orally, all it's going to do is digest in the stomach. It's never going to make the blood. So that's what I'm saying here. You cannot take insulin orally because it will just digest in the stomach, and it doesn't even make the blood. So the insulin must be injected. So therefore, you have to have the insulin shots. The body will try to get the excess sugar out by causing a person to urinate more than normal. In other words, one of the symptoms of diabetes is the fact that you actually need to urinate a lot. Let me get these up. You take people who, they have to drink a lot of water because they're thirsty. They're thirsty all the time. Why are they thirsty all the time? Well, it's because their body is starving. They're not getting energy. They're not getting glucose into the cells. And so the body is starving, and they're drinking, and they're thirsty and thirsty and thirsty. But they're not still, it's not helping out. So they continue to be thirsty. Well, the blood sugar is too high. So what does the body try to do? It tries to excrete all of the extra sugar by going to the bathroom and urinating. So they're in the bathroom fairly frequently. That's one of the signs of diabetes. There's an explanation for all of the symptoms that a person has, which is why I want to go into the symptoms. There's an explanation for them. And if you understand the explanation, then you can understand what's happening in the body to make you the way that you are if you're diabetic. So let's go to these charts. You will see sometimes I'm repeating something, but I really want to make it clear. In diabetes is an equal opportunity illness because it affects all ages, all sizes, the thin, the heavy, all races, and both men and women. And many don't even know that they have it. Here are the symptoms. I've gone over this before, but I want to review it and go over it again. Frequent urination, extreme hunger. Why? Because the cells are starving. They need food. Fatigue, frequent infections, slow healing, excessive thirst, weight loss. That is one of the symptoms. If you are a diabetic and you haven't been diagnosed, one of the symptoms of early diagnosis of diabetes is that you have a severe weight loss. When I went in, I was losing a lot of weight. And my doctor said, I want to send you to a specialist. You shouldn't be losing this much weight. Well, I went into him one day. I saw him fairly frequently because he was a friend of mine, and I used to go in every so often anyway. And I says, I don't understand why it's so hard for people to lose weight. I've lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks. And he just practically jumped from his chair. I says, it is so easy. People complain it's hard to lose weight. It's easy. I haven't really tried to go on a diet. I've lost another 4 pounds this week, and I'm not even on a diet. So he says, Pat, something's wrong. And he sent me to a doctor, and then they discovered I was diabetic. That plus foot infections were my first symptoms. So excessive weight loss is one of the symptoms of diabetes, and that doesn't last too long because when you start eating and when your system is straightened around, you will gain weight. And the other thing is, if you're taking insulin, you will gain weight. Insulin puts weight on people. It actually does. And you have dry, itchy skin. I've mentioned that once before. Most people, whoops. Okay, let me get this up. Insulin is a hormone and it's a protein, and it's injected to replace the insulin that the body is not able to produce, and it has to do with blood sugar. It brings the blood sugar into the cells. In type 1 diabetes, the body does not produce insulin at all. It can occur at birth or very young, or it can occur in childhood, and it sometimes affects teens and young adults as well. You can be a type 2 diabetic. I wanted to mention Gary Hall. I mentioned this here. Gary Hall, if you remember, was an Olympic swimmer. Excuse me, was an Olympic swimmer. That's it. I'm going to get it. He actually had gold medals in swimming, and they discovered he was a diabetic in a competition when he collapsed. He actually collapsed. He didn't know he was diabetic, but he collapsed, and somebody found him, and they went and put him in the hospital, and lo and behold, he was diabetic, type 1. He had no insulin. Now, for a swimmer who is exercising and swimming and practicing their strokes, they use up sugar quickly. And so therefore he could have gone quite a long time and been a diabetic and not even known it, and he didn't know it. And the reason is he was using so much energy, it probably was keeping his blood sugar low. But then when he wasn't exercising as a type 1 diabetic, his blood sugar would be getting very high. Now, when they first discovered he had diabetes, some of the doctors told him he would have to stop swimming. And he didn't want to do that, so he continued to swim for quite a while and entered contests, swimming contests and so forth, and won various awards. But he also went on the speakers tour, and he would talk to people. I know I had a friend of mine who was a diabetic educator going to a conference where he was going to be the main speaker because he could talk about what it was like to be a diabetic in sports, where you use a lot of energy and you exercise a lot and you practice a lot. How do you control your blood sugar when you're going to be very, very physically active? Well, there are some sports, in some ways, people can't continue because they can't keep their blood sugar in check. But for him, he continued to swim. And one of the things he had to do was check his blood sugar almost constantly after a meet, after a practice. He had to check and make sure it wasn't too low. And when he wasn't practicing, he had to make sure it wasn't too high. And since he was type 1, he was considered type 1 juvenile because he was not yet 20 years old. He was like 18 or 19 or so. So he was still considered to be, in a sense, a child. So it makes a big important difference. You have to keep your blood sugar right on if you're going to be able to do sports. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are involved in sports that are diabetic, but he was so well known that he became kind of the poster boy as to how to do it right. Now, I know I have sometimes been asked by a doctor, would you like to use an insulin pump? And I've always said no. Because a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I read an article about a baseball game where an umpire just collapsed. He just collapsed. And he was diabetic. And what happened with him is he was wearing a pump, and the pump malfunctioned, and he was getting a lot more insulin than what he was supposed to get. And as a result, his blood sugar went way too low, and he collapsed and went into a coma. Now, he was saved, he was rescued, they got him straightened around, so he was all right after that. But one of my fears about pumps is what happens if they malfunction. And also, you have to program those pumps. A certain amount of insulin will be given at a certain time if you program it that way. That means you've got to eat at the specific time that you have programmed the pump to give you the extra insulin that you need. Well, my life is such that I'll be working along, it's 8 o'clock, and I haven't had supper yet. Maybe I should eat something. I can't restrict my life and schedule it minute by minute throughout the day so that I know at 4 o'clock I'm doing this and 5 o'clock I'm doing that. I'll eat at 6 o'clock. I've got to eat at 6 o'clock. I program my pump, to give me extra insulin then. I can't live my life like that. And so I don't use pumps. I think I have much more control and just do it the normal way. Now, in type 1 diabetes, which is juvenile, and that term is not used so much anymore, juvenile diabetes, because you can get type 1 at an older age. So they used to think it was just children, but it's not. The body doesn't produce insulin, and that can occur at birth or very young. And I talked here about Gary Hall, and he was considered to be a juvenile diabetic. Type 2, most people are type 2. They produce some insulin, but not enough, or the quality of the insulin is so poor they can't use it. And eventually, most type 2s use insulin. They start off with diet and exercise. That's what they always do. And they find out usually quickly that that's not going to work. It never worked with me. And then you get on pills. And what some of these pills do, and I will be getting onto them later, probably next segment, is they force your body to produce more insulin than what it wants to produce. And I have some questions about it. I think sometimes people should be put on insulin a lot sooner than what they are, but nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to force anybody else to do it, but they do produce, you do get more insulin from your pancreas if you're taking some of those pills, and there are pills for other things about diabetes so that you don't spike so much and all of that. But at some point, the pills don't work anymore. I think taking the pills is like beating a dead horse. You're saying, produce, produce, produce. You've got something in you, so you beat the dead horse practically, and he gets up and he runs around because he's told he has to do it. Then he collapses because he can't do it anymore. Why not give insulin a little earlier and allow the pancreas to rest and actually be better for a longer period of time? I'm going to tell you a quick story, and then I'm going to close on this. And the story is this. Two children, they were going to be diabetic. Their parents were diabetic, and they were showing signs of diabetes, but not to the point where they'd have to take insulin yet, or not to the point where they took pills. So instead of giving them pills to make them produce more insulin, they gave insulin shots, just a small amount, like a couple times a day, just a small amount. And that rested the pancreas. And because the pancreas was able to rest and not try to produce what it was not going to be able to do and not be forced to do it, it made the pancreas last a lot longer in a healthy state. So I think what people need to consider is using insulin a little sooner rather than later, resting the pancreas, which it evidently does, and extending the life of the pancreas for a longer period of time. But that's just my opinion. So I'll close it here, and we're going to continue with this next time. And I'll get into the pills, and I'll get into the shots, and what's in them, and what they do to your system, and that kind of thing. So we'll continue next time. Please join me then.